We always talk about adventures and how amazing it is to explore the world out there. Unfortunately, we're also living in a time when traveling isn't that simple anymore, and many of us are still not able to get out of our cities and see the world around us. Heck, some people actually can't even get out of their houses at some point. But don't worry, the time will come for us to get out there and see those things that we've been missing. And also the time will come for us to get back on airplanes. And while we wait for that, it's a good time to talk about 10 airline secrets you didn't know about. Yes, that's right. You might or might not be familiar with airplanes, but I can bet that you didn't know everything that there is to know about these huge machines that help us travel long distances. You'll learn secrets from experts, and trust me, your airplane experience is likely to change after you see the things I have for you today. Number 10. Flight attendants and meals. When you go on a long flight, you're likely going to have the option to get a meal on board. Most of the time, this is free unless you're traveling on a budget airline that requires you to buy your own meal, or even stand up during flight. And usually you have more than one option just so you're not stuck with a single boring choice that you're likely not to eat. It can be rice or noodles, chicken or fish, meat or vegetables. But there comes a point in which some unlucky passengers don't get their preferred choice. Well, apparently sometimes this happens because flight attendants get to choose their own meals before they go around giving food to the passengers. While some airlines provide the crew with their own special meals, some others prefer that the team eats the same thing that the passengers eat. For that reason, the flight attendants might choose their preferred option before they can get to you. But if you're serious about getting your preferred meal, you can be a bit pushy and you might get them to give you what you want. Don't be rude though, because no one likes rude. Also, if you have food preferences, you can contact the airline in advance so they can have a meal with your name on it. There's no way the flight attendant can take that. I mean, unless they do. I mean, really, what are you gonna do in a plane? Number 9. Tray tables. This one might not apply to post-coronavirus times, but for the longest time, it's been known that airplanes only clean their tray tables superficially. What that means is that they only do a quick wipe on the surface in between flights. And usually most of the surfaces are only cleaned superficially due to the tight time frame they had to prepare for the next flight. But as I said, this has now changed due to the pandemic. At least I hope. Prior to these weird times, a deep study found that the dirtiest part of an airplane was the tray table. In fact, it had 8 times more bacteria than the flash button in the lavatory. Today, airlines are being more careful about hygiene practices. They don't want you to get sick or have contact with any unwanted bacteria. But still, I would suggest you bring some antibacterial wet wipes for your next flight, just to make sure things are super clean. Number 8. Communication between pilots and flight attendants. Believe it or not, flight attendants and pilots don't have communication when the plane is below 10,000 feet. In fact, even the pilots aren't allowed to have small talk or random conversations below this altitude. And that's honestly only due to safety. Takeoff, landing, and everything that happens under 10,000 feet require the best out of the pilot. The slightest distraction can turn chaotic, so that's why pilots don't talk among themselves or with the crew during that time. Instead, they communicate with the people at air traffic control. They cross-check their devices and they enter data into their computers. Of course, they'd probably call the flight attendants if there's an emergency. But other than that, their focus is going to be on flying that plane and getting it to where it needs to be safely. Number 7. Pilots and meals. We already talked about flight attendants and meals, but do you know anything about pilots and meals? Their food is completely different than ours. I mean, those noodles that you get on your flight to Singapore might look delicious and all, but you never know if you could get sick after eating them. The same goes for that sandwich that you got on your last flight to Europe. No one is exempt from food poisoning. It can happen to anyone. And for that reason, the pilots of an aircraft get different meals. And I don't mean just different to the ones that passengers get. They're also different among themselves. So if one of them gets sick right after eating their last meal prior to landing, then the other one can easily take over. I don't know about you, but that's a relief to me, because it would be unfortunate if 2 pilots have to run to the bathroom at the same time, especially if it's during an important time such as landing. Number 6. Upgrades for doctors. Emergencies can happen anywhere, and that includes when you're up in the air, more than 10,000 feet above the ground. Luckily, a lot of times there might be a doctor or a nurse who can help anyone who has an emergency in midair. There's a story about a passenger who was in economy class and had to be put on oxygen. The flight attendants looked for a doctor, and sure enough, there was one who was also flying in economy class. To make things easier, they put both the doctor and the patient in business class. That way the doctor could keep a close eye on the other passenger in case he needed further assistance. This is an example of what can happen if you're a nurse or a doctor who can offer help to other passengers who are in need. Your medical skills not only can save someone's life, but they can also help you get a free upgrade. And I know a lot of times the last thing we want to do is work during our trips. But most of the people who work in the medical field are eager to help at any time, even if they're on holiday. Number 5. Life jackets as souvenirs. Before takeoff, every passenger has to watch some sort of video or hear the crew talk about safety during the flight. And most importantly, they talk about what to do in case of an emergency. One of the things they emphasize the most is the importance of life jackets and how to use them if for any reason the plane has to land on water. Anyway, if that happens, you gotta put on your life jacket, get out of the plane, and wait for help. Other than that, a life jacket is not necessary during your flight, or during life in general. But there are tons of people who unnecessarily grab those life jackets and take them home. That's right, despite the fact that these aren't emergencies during their journey, they still take those jackets with them. This is a terrible loss for the airline, as they usually have to spend a lot of money replacing those missing jackets. And if you think this is a cool and funny idea, well, I got news for you. This is a punishable offense. You could get banned from the airline and face even more serious consequences if you're caught in the act of stealing them. So please don't steal them. Number 4. Flight mode. I know a lot of you find this annoying, but regular passengers are always required to put the phones and other devices in flight mode. And if your device doesn't have that option, then you're required to completely turn it off. However, you might be surprised to know that a lot of flight attendants and pilots rarely or never do this. Sometimes it's simply because they forget to turn off their phones, and other times it's simply because they don't really care. After all, there isn't enough evidence that suggests that using your phone during a flight can interfere with the operations or anything like that. But it can interfere with ground networks that the airlines are connected to. For that reason, flight attendants don't worry too much about the flight mode rule, but they definitely expect you to follow it. Having your cell phone on might not cause a plane crash, but it can definitely get on the flight attendant's nerves, to the point that you can get in serious trouble. Number 3. Flying with pets. Taking our furry pets on holidays with us might sound tempting, but I would advise you to think twice before you take them on a flight with you. While most airlines are very careful about the way they treat pets, there are things that are simply hard to control. Like the fact that sometimes pets are put on a ramp and they have to wait there for a long time under the heat before they get put inside the plane. Also, they get put in dark containers where there's nothing else other than lots of luggage and other stressed out pets. Some animals don't even survive the flights due to all the stress that they face. I know sometimes there's no other option other than taking them with you, but it's better if you can avoid bringing them inside a plane. Now it's time for today's best pick. The next airline secret on our list involves security threats. Let's see what can happen if we ever find ourselves in an unlucky situation. Number 2. Security threats. What happens when there's an aggressive passenger on board? And what if said person is sitting right next to you? Well, there's a lot of possible scenarios there. But the bottom line is that there's not much that can be done about that. I mean, if these passengers show their true colors prior to flying, then they most likely get kicked out just in time. But if you find out about their reckless behavior in mid-flight, then you're kinda stuck with them. In a very bad scenario, they might get handcuffed, and on a terrible occasion, the airplane might fly to the nearest airport to kick them off. But doing that would be so expensive that the airlines avoid doing it unless it's completely necessary. Also, if there's an actual security threat on board, then the pilots won't open their cockpit door. After 9/11, there's been strong protocols put into place to the point that pilots aren't allowed to open their doors at all for any occasion, even if the flight attendants try hard to convince them. Luckily, there's a lot of security protocols prior to boarding, so the chances of facing one of these unfortunate situations is pretty unlikely. So let's hope none of you ever have to face this. Before we move on, do me a favor. My analytics show that only about 15% of you watching are actually subscribed. Come on guys, what's up with that? Can you guys please hit the subscribe button? You guys watch my videos every day anyway, so you might as well subscribe and keep up to date with every video we put out. Number 1. Beating jet lag. At the top of our list, we have a secret that's going to help you in future travels. Especially if you travel to a place that's in a very different time zone than the one where you live. I'm talking about jet lag. The reason why you might experience jet lag is because airplane cabins are less humid than what you're used to. For that reason, you're likely to get dehydrated. The combination of dehydration, stiffness, and time change can make you a victim of jet lag. But all you gotta do to overcome this is to drink lots of water and take every opportunity you can to stretch a bit during the flight. Try to avoid coffee and alcohol, as these will just make you more dehydrated. The more water you get, the less harsh your jet lag's gonna be. So tell me, are you ready to fly now? I really do hope so. After it's safe to actually go out. Do you know any other airline secrets? Let us know in the comment section down below. With all that said and done, that's our video for today, folks, and I will see you all next time. Later, everybody!